The thin April sunshine barely warmed the sidewalks of Oakwood Heights as Marcus Johnson knelt before the front door of the Queen Anne duplex on Maple Street. His fingers, calloused from years of construction work yet surprisingly nimble, worked methodically at dismantling the old brass lock. A small toolbox lay open beside him, its contents meticulously organized, a testament to his precision and professionalism. At 42, Marcus had finally achieved what many consider the American dream. After 15 years of managing properties for others, saving every spare dollar, and surviving a brutal divorce that nearly bankrupted him, he had purchased his first multi-unit building. The duplex was nothing fancy, peel and paint in places, dated fixtures throughout, but it was his, and that made all the difference. "Just need to get these locks changed before the new tenants arrive next week," he muttered to himself, satisfaction evident in his deep voice. He'd already completed a host of repairs inside. Fixing leaky faucets, patching drywall, replacing that ancient water heater that had been one winter away from disaster. Across the street, Jennifer Wilkins watched through her living room blinds, coffee mug clutched tightly in her manicured hand. She'd lived in Oakwood Heights for 23 years and prided herself on knowing everyone who belonged in the neighborhood, and more importantly, who didn't. "Frank," she called to her husband, who was engrossed in his morning newspaper, "there's a man tampering with the Petersons' door." Frank barely looked up. "The Petersons moved out last month, Jen, remember." "Well, I know that," she snapped, setting down her mug with enough force to slosh coffee onto the immaculate granite countertop. "But nobody said anything about selling the place, and this guy definitely doesn't look like a realtor." Frank sighed, recognizing the familiar tone. Jennifer had appointed herself the unofficial neighborhood sentinel years ago, and her concerns had led to more than a few uncomfortable situations. "Maybe he's with a property management company," Frank suggested, hoping to diffuse what he knew was coming. But Jennifer had already pulled out her phone. Her thumbs moved rapidly across the screen as she composed a post to the neighborhood watch group. "Suspicious man breaking into the duplex at 247 Maple, wearing work clothes but no company logo or vehicle. Police should be called." Outside, Marcus stood up and tested the new deadbolt, satisfied with the smooth action. He made a note on his clipboard about the front door needing a fresh coat of paint before spring was over. The walkthrough checklist was nearly complete, and pride swelled in his chest. His father, who had worked as a janitor his entire life, would have been amazed to see his son owning property in a neighborhood like this. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his sister, Aisha. "Hey, sis, what's up?" "Just checking how your first day as landlord is going," she replied, her voice warm with shared excitement. "Almost done with the basic safety upgrades. It feels strange, to be on this side of things for once." As they spoke, Marcus noticed a police cruiser slowly rolling down the street. He didn't think much of it until the vehicle pulled up directly in front of the duplex. "Gotta go, Aisha. Something's happening." Two officers stepped out, both wearing expressions that Marcus had seen too many times before. One approached with his hand resting casually on his holster, while the other stayed back, scanning the property. "Good morning, sir," the first officer said, his tone professionally neutral but eyes watchful. "We received a call about someone breaking into this property. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" "I'm the owner," Marcus replied, straightening to his full height. He kept his movements deliberate and slow, acutely aware of how quickly situations like this could escalate. "Just purchased this property last week. Closing was on Thursday." The officer's expression didn't change. "Do you have any identification or proof of ownership on you, sir?" Marcus nodded calmly, though his heart hammered in his chest. "My ID is in my back pocket. My paperwork is in my car around the corner. Mind if I reach for my wallet?" The officer nodded, and Marcus carefully extracted his wallet, handing over his driver's license. While the first officer examined it, the second one stepped forward. "We received reports of someone attempting to break in," he explained, his tone slightly more conversational than his partner's. "Can you explain what you were doing with the locks?" "Changing them," Marcus said. "Standard procedure when taking over a property. I manage several buildings across town for West Side Properties, but this is the first one I own myself." Across the street, Jennifer had moved to her front porch, arms crossed tightly over her chest as she watched the scene unfold. She texted 3 neighbors about the situation, and now Mrs. Geller from next door had joined her, both women speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "He doesn't look like any property owner I've ever seen," Jennifer whispered. "And why wouldn't he have introduced himself to the neighborhood if he bought the place?" "I think I saw him yesterday too, walking around the property," Mrs. Geller added. "I almost called then, but Frank was home and he said I was overreacting." The first officer handed Marcus back his license. "Sir, would you mind showing us that paperwork? Just procedure." "Of course," Marcus said, gesturing toward his car. "It's in my briefcase. I'll walk slowly." As they moved toward his vehicle, a sensible 3-year-old Camry parked half a block away. Marcus noticed the small audience forming. The neighborhood watch had clearly been activated. He felt the familiar weight of being perceived as out of place, a sensation he'd hoped property ownership might finally alleviate. At his car, Marcus retrieved a leather portfolio containing all the closing documents, property insurance, and the business plan he'd spent 2 years perfecting. He handed the deed to the officer. The property transferred officially on April 15th, he explained. I've been in the property management business for 15 years. This is my first purchase as an investor rather than just a manager. The younger officer looked over the paperwork, his expression softening slightly as he recognized the legitimacy of the documents. Marcus could see the moment the situation shifted, from potential crime to obvious misunderstanding. Looks like everything's in order, Mr. Johnson, the officer said, handing back the paperwork. Sorry for the interruption. We have to follow up on all calls. I understand, Marcus replied, though the familiar knot of frustration tightened in his stomach. You're just doing your job. As the officers prepared to leave, Jennifer marched across the street, determination in every step. She'd been watching the interaction and was clearly dissatisfied with its conclusion. Officers, she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of entitlement that expected immediate attention. I'm the one who reported the suspicious activity. As you provided proper credentials, this is a very safe neighborhood, and we maintain a strict community watch. The younger officer turned toward her. Ma'am, Mr. Johnson is the legal owner of this property. Everything is in order. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly as she processed this information, her gaze darting between Marcus and the officers. For a brief moment, confusion replaced the certainty on her face, but it quickly hardened into skepticism. Well, I've lived here for over 20 years, and nobody informed the neighborhood association about his sale, she insisted, her voice rising slightly. We have procedures for these things. Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand with practiced professionalism. I'm Marcus Johnson. I closed on the property last week. It's nice to meet you, neighbor. Jennifer stared at his outstretched hand for a beat too long before taking it limply. Jennifer Wilkins. I run the Neighborhood Association and the Community Watch program. The tension crackled between them as the officers exchanged knowing glances. This wasn't their first encounter with neighborhood dynamics like these, and both seemed eager to extricate themselves from what was rapidly becoming an awkward social situation rather than a police matter. If everything's settled here, the senior officer said, we'll be on our way. Have a good day, folks. As the police cruiser pulled away, Marcus and Jennifer stood facing each other on the sidewalk, the power dynamic between them shifting in ways neither had anticipated when the day began. The silence between Marcus and Jennifer stretched uncomfortably as the police cruiser disappeared around the corner. A warm breeze rustled the Blue Moon dogwood trees, carrying the scent of fresh mulch and spring flowers that seemed jarringly pleasant against the tension of the moment. So, Jennifer finally said, her voice brittle with forced civility, you purchased the Petersons' property? I'm surprised they didn't mention it to anyone in the neighborhood. Marcus tucked his paperwork back into his briefcase. From what I understand, they were eager for a quick sale after Mr. Peterson got that job offer in Denver. I worked directly with their realtor. Jennifer's eyes flickered toward the duplex, appraising it with new understanding. And you're planning to live here? No. Marcus replied, recognizing the subtle probing in her question. I'm an investor. I own and manage several properties across the city. This one will be fully renovated and rented out to qualified tenants. Jennifer's posture stiffened slightly at this information. Our neighborhood has very specific standards, Mr. Johnson. We maintain a certain aesthetic and community feel. There's an HOA covenant, though I suppose the Petersons' realtor might not have mentioned that. Marcus smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. The HOA covenant was included in my due diligence, Ms. Wilkins. I've reviewed all 17 pages thoroughly. My properties always meet or exceed neighborhood standards. From across the street, Frank Wilkins watched the interaction through his living room window, recognizing the familiar set of his wife's shoulders that signaled her building indignation. With a sigh, he set down his newspaper and headed outside, hoping to diffuse what was clearly becoming a situation. Morning, Frank called as he approached, extending his hand to Marcus. Frank Wilkins, welcome to Oakwood Heights. Marcus shook his hand firmly. Marcus Johnson, thank you for the welcome. Jennifer shot her husband a look that Marcus couldn't quite interpret but recognized as the silent communication of long-married couples. Jennifer was just explaining your neighborhood standards, Marcus said. I appreciate the community's dedication to maintaining property values. As an investor, that benefits me as well. Frank nodded, seeming relieved at the professional tone. Have you owned properties long? Managed them for 15 years, but this is my first personal investment property, Marcus replied, a note of pride creeping into his voice despite his efforts to maintain a neutral tone. I started as a maintenance technician after college, Worked my way up to property manager and saved for years to make this purchase. As Marcus spoke, a sleek BMW pulled up to the curb. A woman in her mid-30s stepped out, her tailored pantsuit and confident stride marking her as a professional. She approached with a wide smile. "Mr. Johnson, I'm so sorry I'm late. Traffic on the highway was terrible," she called, extending her hand. "Alicia Chen from Metropolitan Design. I have those interior renovation sketches you requested." Marcus greeted her warmly. "Perfect timing, Alicia. I just finished the lock replacements." He turned to the Wilkinses. "Alicia's firm is handling the interior redesign. We're aiming for an upscale, modern aesthetic while preserving the historic character of the building." Jennifer's expression shifted slightly, reassessing Marcus as she processed this information. The presence of the designer, clearly high-end from her attire and the luxury vehicle, added a dimension to the situation she hadn't anticipated. "What kind of renovations are you planning?" she asked, her tone marginally warmer. Marcus recognized the opening and seized it with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to navigating delicate social situations. "We're keeping all the original woodwork and restoring the historic facade, but modernizing the kitchens and bathrooms. Energy-efficient appliances, updated electrical, that sort of thing. I believe in preserving the character that makes neighborhoods like this special." Alicia nodded enthusiastically. "Mr. Johnson has been very specific about maintaining the architectural integrity. We're even sourcing period-appropriate fixtures for the front porch." Frank seemed genuinely interested. "The porch could use some attention. Those columns have been sagging since the Petersons bought the place." "I noticed that during my initial inspection," Marcus agreed. "We've already contracted with a carpenter who specializes in historic restorations." As the conversation shifted to renovation details, Marcus observed Jennifer's demeanor gradually transforming. The initial suspicion hadn't vanished entirely, but it was being steadily eroded by the realization that her new neighbor wasn't just a property owner, but a meticulous investor committed to quality improvements. Mrs. Geller and another neighbor had drifted closer during the conversation, hovering at the edges with poorly disguised curiosity. Marcus nodded politely in their direction, causing them to startle slightly at being noticed. "Perhaps," Marcus suggested, seizing the moment, "once the renovations are further along, we could host a small open house for the neighbors. I'd welcome input from longtime residents like yourselves on how to best honor the neighborhood's character." The strategic olive branch had its intended effect. Jennifer's expression softened fractionally, professional curiosity beginning to override her initial prejudice. "The neighborhood association would certainly be interested in that," she conceded, though her tone suggested she was still processing the rapid evolution of the morning's events. As Marcus excused himself to review Alicia's designs inside the property, he felt the weight of Jennifer's gaze following him. The confrontation had been diffused, but he recognized the tentative nature of this truce. In neighborhoods like Oakwood Heights, acceptance wasn't granted overnight, especially to someone who didn't fit the expected profile of who belonged there. Inside the duplex, as sunlight streamed through the bay windows, illuminating decades of history in the worn hardwood floors, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. The property was his, and despite the morning's rocky start, he was one step closer to being recognized as its rightful owner. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Maple Street hummed with activity. Construction vehicles lined the curb outside the duplex, and the rhythmic sound of hammers and power tools had become the neighborhood's new soundtrack. What had begun as a simple lock replacement had blossomed into a full-scale renovation that was impossible for Oakwood Heights to ignore. Marcus moved through the property with confidence, clipboard in hand, as he consulted with the project foreman. The original renovation budget had expanded after discovering some electrical issues that needed immediate attention, but Marcus had anticipated such surprises. 15 years in property management had taught him to always buffer his estimates. "Mr. Johnson." Marcus turned to see Darren, a 10-year-old from down the street, peering through the wrought iron fence. Over the past 2 weeks, Darren had appointed himself unofficial site supervisor, appearing reliably each day after school. "Hey, Darren, what's the report today?" Marcus called, walking over to the fence. "They delivered more wood and those fancy light things," Darren reported seriously. "And Mrs. Shem was here earlier. She had big fabric books." Marcus smiled. "Good eye. Those fancy light things are reproductions of the original 1920s fixtures. Want to see them up close?" Darren's eyes widened. "Can I really come in?" "As long as you wear this," Marcus said, pulling a spare hard hat from his truck and adjusting it to fit the boy's head. "Safety first." Across the street, Jennifer Wilkins observed this interaction from her porch while watering her immaculate row of hydrangeas. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she watched Marcus escort the child into the construction site. "He shouldn't have that boy in there," she muttered to herself. "It's a liability." Even as the words left her mouth, she noted how carefully Marcus kept Darren away from active work areas, how the construction crew all paused respectfully as the pair walked through. The hard hat, she had to admit, was a responsible touch. Jennifer's relationship with Marcus remained complicated. The morning after their confrontation, a detailed letter had appeared in her mailbox outlining the renovation schedule, complete with expected work hours, noise warnings, and Marcus's direct contact information for any concerns. The professionalism of the gesture had been difficult to criticize, even for Jennifer. Her phone chimed with an incoming text from Lisa Geller. "Have you seen the new columns on the porch? They look amazing." Jennifer frowned. The neighborhood women's growing admiration for Marcus's renovation work irritated her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. The monthly book club meeting had been dominated by discussion of the transformation taking place, with several members openly praising the refreshing attention to detail. Frank emerged from the house, mail in hand. Bills, and oh, look at this. He handed Jennifer a cream-colored envelope addressed to the Wilkins family. Inside was an elegantly designed invitation. "You are cordially invited to a neighbor appreciation open house, Saturday, May 15th, 5 p.m., 247 Maple Street. Light refreshments will be served. See the preservation of history in progress." He actually did it, Jennifer said, surprised despite herself. The open house had seemed like a placating gesture at the time, meant something Marcus would follow through on. Frank took the invitation back, examining it. Nice cardstock, embossed lettering. "He's not cutting corners. It's just good business," Jennifer replied, though her conviction sounded hollow even to her own ears. Across the street, Marcus was showing Darren the original crown molding they'd uncovered beneath layers of paint, explaining how craftsmen had once carved such details by hand. The boy listened with rapt attention, asking questions that Marcus answered with patient enthusiasm. Later that afternoon, as Marcus was leaving the property, he encountered Jennifer at the mailbox. "I received your invitation," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "I hope you and Frank can make it," Marcus replied. "The main structural work will be completed by then, and I'd value your input on some of the finishing touches." Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "My input?" "Frank mentioned you have a background in historical preservation. The dining room has some original wallpaper we uncovered behind a bookcase, 1920s pattern, mostly intact. I'm torn between trying to restore it or documenting it properly before replacing it with something period appropriate." Jennifer couldn't hide her surprise. She had indeed been on the city's historical preservation committee for 6 years, something she mentioned frequently at neighborhood meetings but didn't expect Marcus to know. "Restoration is rarely practical for wallpaper that old," she found herself saying. "The materials degrade and modern reproductions are usually more stable." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's my instinct as well, but I'd appreciate it if you take a look. We don't want to lose any historical significance." The conversation shifted into technical details of historical preservation, and Jennifer found herself engaged despite her reservations. When they parted 10 minutes later, she felt oddly unsettled by how easily their interaction had flowed once focused on a shared interest. That evening, as the Wilkins sat down to dinner, Frank noticed his wife's pensive mood. "Something on your mind?" he asked, passing the salad bowl. Jennifer arranged her napkin precisely on her lap. "Do you think I overreacted? That first day with Mr. Johnson?" Frank considered his response carefully. "I think you responded to what you perceived as unusual activity in the neighborhood, which is what the watch program is designed to do." "That's not an answer, Frank." He sighed. "Would you have called if it had been someone who looked like Pete Thompson working on that door?" Pete Thompson, their longtime handyman, was 65 and white. Jennifer's silence was answer enough. "He seems to be going out of his way to be a good neighbor," Frank added gently. "I know," Jennifer admitted. "That's what makes it worse." Through the dining room window, they could see the duplex across the street, now wrapped in scaffolding but with the porch lights glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. A transformation was underway, not just of the property, but perhaps of the neighborhood itself. And as Jennifer reluctantly added the open house invitation to the family calendar on the refrigerator, she acknowledged that perhaps a transformation was beginning within herself as well. The Saturday of the open house arrived with picture-perfect spring weather, clear blue skies, gentle breezes, and flowering trees that dotted the neighborhood with bursts of pink and white. By 1:30 p.m., Marcus was making final preparations, arranging platters of catered hors d'oeuvres alongside architectural drawings that showed the renovation's progress and future plans. "The bar setup looks great by the bay window," Alicia Chen commented, adjusting a vase of fresh tulips. "And these before and after photo boards are going to impress everyone." Marcus nodded, surveying the space with a critical eye. The duplex transformation was remarkable even in its half-finished state. The original hardwood floors had been restored to a warm, haunted glow, the crown molding repaired and highlighted with period-appropriate paint, and the built-in bookcases stripped of decades of paint to reveal the craftsmanship beneath. "Did you decide what to do about that wallpaper Mrs. Wilkins was concerned about?" Alicia asked. We're documenting it thoroughly and then installing a historically accurate reproduction, Marcus replied. Jennifer's suggestion about contacting the Historical Society was spot on. They had records of the original pattern. Jennifer, is it? Alicia raised an eyebrow with a knowing smile. Marcus shrugged, though a slight flush colored his cheeks. Mrs. Wilkins has been unexpectedly helpful this past week. She's got a good eye for detail. At precisely 1:55 p.m., the doorbell rang. Marcus opened the door to find Frank and Jennifer Wilkins standing on the newly restored porch, 5 minutes early. Welcome, Marcus greeted them warmly. You're our first guests. I hope we're not too early, Frank said, handing over a bottle of wine. Jennifer insisted we shouldn't be late. Jennifer smoothed her linen dress, her eyes already scanning the entryway. I wanted to see everything properly before it got crowded. She paused, taking in the restored staircase and original light fixture. You kept the banister details. Every single spindle, Marcus confirmed. It took 3 days of careful stripping to remove all those layers of paint. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus gave them a personal tour before other neighbors began to arrive. Jennifer's comments grew increasingly detailed and appreciative as they moved through the rooms, her initial reserve melting away in the face of her genuine interest in historical architecture. By 3 o'clock, the duplex was filled with neighbors. Couples wandered from room to room, wine glasses in hand, exclaiming overexposed brick walls and restored fireplace mantels. Marcus moved easily through the crowd, answering questions and sharing his vision for the property's future. In the dining room, Jennifer found herself surrounded by women from the neighborhood association, all eager to hear her assessment. The attention to historical accuracy is impressive, she admitted, and he's making smart upgrades where it matters. The electrical system was a fire waiting to happen. And he's so knowledgeable, added Maureen Patterson, the association's treasurer. Did you know he has a degree in urban planning? He just never got to use it because the construction job paid better right out of college. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. No, I didn't know that. Oh yes, Frank and I had the most fascinating conversation with him last week, Maureen continued. He stopped by when he saw Frank struggling with that broken sprinkler valve, fixed it in 10 minutes, and then stayed for lemonade. The revelation that Marcus had been forming connections throughout the neighborhood, connections Jennifer knew nothing about, unsettled her slightly. She excused herself and drifted toward the kitchen, where people were gathering around a display of the renovation plans. The upper unit will have this gorgeous skylight, Alicia was explaining to a captivated audience, and we're converting the old butler's pantry into a home office space, perfect for today's remote workers. What kind of tenants are you hoping to attract? Mrs. Geller asked Marcus, who was refilling a water pitcher nearby. Professional couples, most likely, he replied. The rent point will be on the higher end for the area, but the amenities will justify it. I believe in quality housing that attracts long-term tenants who care about their community. Jennifer noticed several approving nods among the neighbors. Marcus had just skillfully addressed one of the neighborhood's unspoken concerns, the fear that rental properties might bring in undesirable elements. His answer had been diplomatically perfect. Marcus, could you show me that wallpaper sample again? Jennifer found herself asking. I've been thinking about your reproduction dilemma. As they stepped away from the crowd, Jennifer was acutely aware of the irony. 3 weeks ago, she reported this man to the police as suspicious. Now she was deep in conversation with him about historically accurate wallpaper patterns and the merits of different restoration approaches. I appreciate your expertise on this, Marcus said sincerely. Your suggestion about the local archives was invaluable. It's nice to have someone actually listen, Jennifer admitted. The last 3 homeowners ignored all the historical committee's recommendations. They shared a smile of mutual understanding, and for a brief moment, Jennifer saw Marcus not as an outsider or even as the new landlord, but simply as a neighbor who shared her appreciation for preserving the neighborhood's character. The moment was interrupted by Darren, who burst into the room wearing his now customary hard hat. Mr. Johnson, everyone's saying the lemonade is out, but I found more in the cooler on the porch. Can I bring it in? That would be very helpful, Darren. Just be careful with the glass pitcher. The boy beamed with pride at being trusted with such an important task. As the afternoon progressed, Jennifer observed Marcus in his element discussing property values with a retired real estate agent from Oak Drive, explaining energy efficiency upgrades to the environmental science professor from Elm Street, and patiently answering young Darren's endless questions about construction techniques. By the time Frank appeared at her elbow suggesting they should head home, Jennifer realized she had spent nearly 3 hours at an event she had initially planned to attend for only the minimum socially acceptable time. This was quite successful, she acknowledged as they crossed the street to their own home. The property will certainly improve our street's appeal once it's finished. Frank gave her a knowing look. And Marcus? Has he improved the street's appeal too? Jennifer's lips twitched with a reluctant smile. He's not what I expected. No, Frank agreed. He's much better than what you expected. As they reached their porch, Jennifer glanced back at the duplex, now glowing with warm light as the afternoon began to fade. Through the bay window, she could see Marcus laughing with a group of neighbors, looking completely at home in a space that, just 3 weeks ago, she had been certain he had no right to enter. The neighborhood was changing, perhaps in ways that were long overdue.